Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Ilse Wolfe, Director from Wolfe Property Coaching. Introducing you, we have Matt, Founder and Director of Betta Group based in Hawke's Bay. Matt Mason, thank you for joining us. This is going to be such an interesting session, and thanks for your time tonight.
And thanks, Ilse. Yeah, really looking forward to talking to you guys and letting you know all about building inspections and meth testing and all those deals and that, maybe you shouldn't have gone for or don't go for. So, yeah, really excited to be here and really appreciate your guys' time.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We often talk about the successes and the cases that sound amazing. Those are the ones that we often share. They kind of are the clickbaity ones. But, my good old mate, Ed McKnight from Opus Partners, he always talks about tell people the things that they shouldn't do or the things that they don't want to do, because that is often as valuable as the success stories, which are, there are plenty of those around. In fact, we've got two examples tonight that from both my perspective as a property coach and from Matt's perspective, being all over things due diligence, this is where we want to really share some expertise. So whether you are actively purchasing or if you are trying to build your knowledge bank as you look for your next property investment acquisition, might be your home as well. We want to bring you the tools, expertise, and point you to the right people so that you can get the right information, but also know what to do with the information. Because, a deal can look great from one perspective, but if you don't really add a thorough due diligence to that process, how it can land can be massively different from how it sets out. So a little bit of admin, I'll share my screen. Can you see my slides, Matt? Everyone good? Cool. Alrighty. So we want to cover off a couple of deals that our clients said no to. As I say, very valuable, because the worst thing you can have is buyer's remorse. And this is one thing I say to my clients all the time. And you can use this adage for so many situations, whether it be, should I push another $5,000 in the auction room, or, what's my maximum price? Or you can apply this to so many situations. And the most important thing is that you opt in for a deal. You never want to purchase through peer pressure or FOMO or hype, only to realize you've pushed yourself too far and not be, first of all, aware of what it will provide or not provide for you, and realize that too late, secondly. So tonight what we're going to cover off is two deals that our clients said no to. Is due diligence that important? And tonight we're focusing on existing builds, secondhand properties that if you don't really think about how the property will perform for you from various aspects, you're putting yourself at risk. So I work with investors who are looking to renovate, add value, cash flow hack, which is our take on the BRRRR. So adding value and finding the right properties. If they're standalone, we want to help you maximize the value add and cash flow and gross returns from rent by adding an internal bedroom and also completing that cosmetic renovation to boost the value, boost the cash flow. And as you'll see shortly, a build report for an existing build, something that was built in likely the 60s, 70s, will look very different from a new build report, and that's fine. But it's understanding what is acceptable and what can be managed, what can be scoped, what you can cost, and what's appropriate versus what's that line, and when do you know if you've crossed that because it's become too big an issue, it's disproportionate to the deal, or for whatever reason it does no longer work for you. That's what you want to identify. And also how you can use these reports to your advantage. You've probably heard all this before about myself. So been investing for nearly 20 years, very, very passionate about accelerating and creating faster results. I'm not a very patient investor myself, so it's all about adding value, adding bedrooms, standalones, home and incomes, blocks of units to boost cash flow. It's the liquidity that we focus on for our investors to boost cash flow and returns, which aids servicing to build the portfolio faster. So if that sounds like you, that's basically what I live and breathe all 24/7, and have been coaching similar for my clients for over 5 years now. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks for joining us.
You. And so I'm Matt Mason and CEO founder of the Betta Group. So the Betta Group, we're nationwide, covering from the far north right down to the bottom of the south. We run or operate under 4 brands. The most common one is Betta Inspect It, which is the pre-purchase property inspection business, the arm of the business. We do condition assessments and detailed maintenance schedules as well. And then the Betta Property Compliance brand, we do the meth testing, the healthy homes work, and the asbestos consultancy doing asbestos testing and surveying. And then Betta Val doing the residential valuation. So we're sort of the one-stop property shop, I guess, for all your due diligence needs when you're buying or investing in real estate. And yeah, we've completed about 150,000 reports, been going for 14 years. And yeah, as I said, excited to talk to you guys tonight about, a few things in that due diligence space. So yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you. And the reason that I requested to have this session with Matt and certainly his team is, as he says, like nationwide. For my clients, they are based here or overseas, and most likely where they purchase to Cashflow Hack with us is normally not where they live. So what I've always wanted for my clients is a power team that is consistent, understands what we're after, prioritizes my clients, and regardless of location, as you'll see here, just the way that Betta offers the services from top to bottom of the country for a new investor on their first Cashflow Hack project or one that is very seasoned. They know what to expect in terms of experience, timelines, and the actual outputs of the reports across all of the reports, including Healthy Homes now, which is really great, just using the same sort of traffic light system, which you'll see super digestible, and from a user experience or as an investor, I genuinely, they're absolutely my go-to. So if you're, whether you're a seasoned investor or looking to learn, the experience is great, and you're such a wealth of knowledge, and there are some interesting stories that Matt will share with us as well to aid your education. So just a brief disclaimer, this is all based on examples that are real in the current market, but this is not personal advice. You will have a chance to catch up, so we will send an email tomorrow as well to book in if you want to discuss your situation and whether cashflow hacking is right for you. So for tonight's agenda, 2 of those case studies. The first one is going to be about meth testing. So why should you care? Is it relevant? And what do the results mean? And also what actions should you take dependent upon what those results are? So pulling on Matt's expertise through the volume of data that he sees. And then number 2, the deal that we said no to is based on more the building report aspect, and Matt will touch a bit on asbestos as well, which is often a common question and a bit of dis-ease, wouldn't you say, Matt? When you come to buyers looking at existing builds, there's quite a knee-jerk reaction like, oh, there's asbestos. So we'll sort of, I guess, myth bust a little bit and let Matt shed some light on why you should care and when. So what do you want to understand from tonight? Basically, as Wolfe Property Coaching, we help investors buy to add significant value very quickly, 6 or 7 week renovations to boost your equity or usable deposit to move into your next deal, and boost your servicing through adding bedrooms and cosmetic renos as well. For tonight, we'll focus on the middle, so the deals. We want to focus on analyzing and go through the process. I'll show you through the process so you can feel more informed. Okay, so, oh, hang on, what's happened here? Perfect. Okay, cool. So before we go into both of these deals, just in terms of the process of how our investors work towards making an offer and then running through due diligence. From my point of view, what I think is actually that due diligence starts at the very outset, particularly with our strategy. We're buying secondhand houses, we're looking to add value. You're basically picking up an asset that could have some skeletons in the closet. It's had a history, it's had many lives, and there is a process that our clients follow. And what we try to do, we're not saying go buy building reports on many different properties at once. We're very methodical. What we want to help our clients achieve through the power teams on the ground, which is, for example, if we have a client based in the UK and they're purchasing a property in Hawke's Bay, they can't just go view and be feet on ground. So very much they are relying on our power teams, including Betta Group, to provide the facts, to provide the data, the insights, and the information that they need to work out and calculate from if it's the right deal for them. what I always try to do is have my clients go through the free due diligence, for lack of the non-paid report aspect first. And because our power teams, in terms of builders, sparkies, plumbers, property managers, they work free of charge up front to help us qualify the deals. We try to work through that and qualify the opportunity before getting onto contract. Once you've cut out competition, and you then have a contract that is yours. You don't have the pressure of someone else coming in to get a contract. You then have control. You have the ability to pay for reports and basically move into that more serious step for due diligence, which is essential. So I guess what we're talking about tonight is the many different services, and Betta Group offers this so that you can be super informed. I guess from a devil's advocate point of view, some buyers might think, well, if I don't know, ostrich, put my head in the sand, everything will be all right. You really can't rely on that. The two benefits that you want from a property investment, if you truly want to be a professional investor and treat this like a business, you're either looking to create wealth through equity and value gain, or you're looking for that passive income. So create great rents and over time build that passive income, or both. So you need to know the information so that you can make the best judgment and choose the optimal deal for you. So this is, I guess, a snapshot of how our clients are looking into those sorts of deals to make sure they get the best outcome. So let's jump into deal number one. So we're going to look at meth testing, or if you're completing your sale and purchase agreement, your offer, on the front page, it will often ask you, would you like to run a toxicology clause, yes or no? So effectively, this is the same. Toxicology basically means a meth test. Are there any other tests that would fall under that, Matt?
No, not really. I mean, you might get a lead test or a mold test, but largely toxicology is most widely used 99% of the time for methamphetamine.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so what we'll do here is I'm just going to stop sharing screen. We are going to run a poll. Where are we here? Oh, hang on, where's it gone? Poll. Before we get into it, I guess, the goal for you tonight from our point of view is we want that you leave tonight feeling like you are far more educated and confident about due diligence and the value that it has, so that you can control a far better outcome for your next deal. We're going to throw this poll up here. Are you confident with a meth report? Do you understand the results, and do you know what actions you should take with that information? So I'll just leave that up for a sec. Oh, interesting. Okay. Matt, can you see this or not? This might be me.
No, just you.
Cool. So alrighty. So I'm going to end poll 3, 2, 1. Okay. Oh, this is your time to shine, Matt.
No pressure.
Okay, yeah. So 83% of you who have answered have said you are not confident in understanding a meth report, or the actions needed to take with those results. So that is really interesting. So I think it kind of takes us back to, is it important, or why is it important? I think it's time to educate about this. So what we'll do is we'll introduce what looks to be an amazing deal on face value, and then let's get Matt to help us out to understand why you should care, basically. So in this first case study, we have Mark and Shanna, who are investors. They are based in the Lower North Island, and they were very much relying on our power teams to get to site in Gisborne for this block of 3 units, which was an off-market deal brought to them through our connections a couple of months ago. And I guess just to really show you here, this is a chart of, we'd qualified it, we'd run through our normal free due diligence process. In terms of the strategy, this was set to give them about a $13,000 per year post-tax cash flow. So $13K in their hand after tax from the scope of renovation that they were looking to undertake. So everything pointed to this being a great deal. obvious value that they could add, a block of units that we couldn't necessarily add bedrooms to, but there was substantial value add. Nothing untoward, no sort of hints that there would be any issue with this. However, you can see that older vinyl could possibly have some asbestos. There's a lot of, it's very retro, a lot of opportunity. So this is the kind of perfect bunch of photos that we look to see when we are purchasing. But then comes the toxicology report. So, Matt, would you like to give an overview of why as a business and with the results that you must see, like the numbers of results that you have? This is a snapshot from a police document that is a new release from them talking about the meth pandemic, massively, massively on the rise. So, is it important?
Yeah, no, it definitely is, right, guys? So we actually produced some data, not so a month or two ago, actually, and we analysed the last 2,000 initial samples we took. So initial being that we'd been engaged by someone like yourselves or a property purchaser wanting to purchase a property, and we would go in and do an initial meth test, which we'll cover on as part of this, but as part of that data, we did 2,000 jobs, and what we found is that on average, 58% of all the last 2,000 samples we tested come back positive. So that's a huge level of positive results that have come back. So what we're also seeing is that the meth testing, the levels are rising, they're getting higher, right?
Oh,
As
wow,
this sort
really?
of, which coincides with what you're seeing in this data here is that when we are finding a positive sample, we used to find down at sort of, it might be 5 micrograms of methamphetamine or even lower. Now we're sort of seeing a lot higher, it might be 20, 30, up in the hundreds. And, our highest being 29,000 we've seen. So there's and
What?
these are properties, guys, that you wouldn't, may not necessarily, some you could walk in and argue and be like, okay, maybe. But, a lot of the time it's actually not the
Mm,
properties that you think. That certainly one at 29,000 was actually an apartment, so maybe not be as relevant to you guys, but this was a really high-end apartment building that we walked into, and to get that level of meth was a real surprise to everybody.
what, like, okay, 29,000, I've never seen that, thankfully. But I mean, if it's an apartment, high intensification, this is someone who's quite brazenly, that's manufactured, right? That has to be.
Y- Yeah, no, that dead right. We would, that is when, you're well into that manufacture level at that, and certainly we're not saying, can't sit here and say, hey, look, guys, we see this all the time. That certainly is a high one, but we are seeing them progressively get higher, and we have had, a huge number in the thousands. It's not,
Mm,
it wasn't a one-off at 29,000. We are seeing that.
yeah.
So definitely, 58% of the properties we test. And, I'll
58.
categorize that with, hey, we don't always test, it's not every property. We do one in every 10 house sales in New Zealand across our brands.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not one in 10, and they all get meth tests and it's
Mm,
58. But, of the meth testing that we do, which, is it, in the thousands across, across the year,
yeah.
58% of them did come back positive. So, there's a lot of it out there.
That's actually so scary because purely like a natural, is it positive or negative? So we'll talk about the initial test, which is composite, right? That's your first step of a test.
Yep.
Composite are basically an indicator of is it present at all, right? So the fact that more than half have it present is actually really terrifying. Like 58%, more than
Yeah,
half is
that's the
wild.
that's the average too, hey? So there's like, the stats, like I think like, somewhere like Timaru or Wellington, they're into the 70s. There are some lower areas that,
Mm,
Christchurch and places like that, they're a bit lower. And look, we don't know why those results, why those regions are a little bit lower, but if you take that average, that is a lot
mm.
of, there's a lot of meth out there, unfortunately.
Wow. And I think it like, the police are literally calling it a pandemic. And like you said, I think this is a really important example. Tell us this story about like the way you described this to me. No one would put an offer on this property ever suspecting there would be positive meth. And this is a really important lesson because I think there are these biases. If you walk into this house, it may look or present a certain way. You think this is more likely to be meth contaminated. But honestly, I think you see it, I see it as well. The ones sometimes you expect have no presence. It's the ones that you don't expect that can hit the hardest, right? So tell us about this one we can see on screen.
Yeah, this one's a real interesting one. This shocked us all actually, and so this property you're seeing on screen, as you can see, it presents really well. It's this property was interesting in the fact that this was an elderly owner, a lady that had lived in the property for a long period of time. She was selling it, as it, we learnt this afterwards, but was selling it to go into a rest home, and so as part of the due diligence, this purchaser got a building inspection and a toxicology report, a meth test. So we went into that property and tested it, and the result come back, as you can see on the screen, with 142 micrograms of methamphetamine. So this really didn't stack up, and we actually come under a little bit of heat on this property from the other parties involved, saying, "Hey, you must have made a mistake, Betta. Like this this lady, this vendor doesn't fit this sort of category of,
Profile.
so
Yeah.
profile of somebody that is likely to have smoked or manufactured meth in a property." So we actually said, "Hey, look, we stand by our report, but what we'll do is, because now we understand what you're saying, it doesn't make sense. We'll go back," and we did a detailed test on the property, and we said, "Hey, look, well, if you don't, if the results come back zero, there's clearly been a mistake, and we
Mm,
will, we won't charge you for the detailed test." Now, the detailed tests come back with a significant amount of meth in the property in a range of different rooms. And so,
mm,
of course, we got questioned again, and we said, but as it transpires, the elderly owner's grandson, who would come in the school holiday period and would smoke, as it
a
turns
lot.
out, was a would smoke meth when visiting over that school holiday, over that period. And so
Mm,
that was a huge problem, and all this come out. And so that's an example where it really didn't fit the profile at all. That property didn't look like a meth house, but really was something that, there was categorically methamphetamine in that property at a reasonably
mm.
high level.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like, yeah, the way it was marketed, you think, okay, this is a relatively safe bet in terms of the meth test. So this would have been so jarring or so shocking, right? I'll just skip ahead so that we can go through the process and you can talk through how that works. So composite test is sort of the fancy jargon and the word for can we check if there is meth present at all? And when you talk about the detailed test, and I'll zip back to the previous slide, that was more like a room by room breakdown, right? So
Yeah.
could you talk us through your process for first of all identifying and then what happens following?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I should have clarified that. So obviously the first result was an initial composite meth test. So what that means is that, that's the first type of meth test you would typically get as a purchaser, any purchaser getting buying a property. And
Hmm.
what that is when we go into a property and we take 20 samples or up to 20 samples throughout the property in high risk locations, and we put them in a single tube. So what we would composite them together.
Hmm.
Okay, so join them together. What that does is that gives us a simple yes no reading, and then the level of total meth found in the property of all, once all those samples are combined. So just to reiterate, that's multiple samples joined in one tube, sent off to the lab and analysed.
Mm,
The reason we do or initial composite is done first is because it's the most cheapest form to get an accurate figure or an accurate yes no on why if there's meth in the property or
mm,
not. You
hmm.
know, um, the tube, it gets assessed by an independent laboratory. So what happens is the inspector will take the or assessor will take the samples and then send them to an independent laboratory,
Mm,
IANZ accredited laboratory for testing. So obviously that testing process costs money and a significant amount of money. So to get the cost down, you join all those
start
samples
with
together,
that.
because typically what you want to know at the start is there
Mm,
meth or is there not? And
yes.
that's a really cost effective way to do that.
Hmm.
And it's very accurate. what it doesn't do, the downside to it, obviously, is it doesn't give you an accurate result
Mm,
on where the meth may be,
yes.
or a super accurate level of how much meth is in each area
Mm,
of the property.
mm-hmm.
So that's why, as a stage two, you would go in and do what we call it, or the industry calls a detailed test, where you do room by room sampling. And
Mm,
that means you would take, multiple tubes per room, and they'd be analysed individually.
yeah.
And obviously, because of the laboratory cost to get them assessed, as well as the additional inspectors' time to take the samples, it's a lot more expensive. So you're sort of talking hundreds, a couple of $100 for the first test compared to sort of like $100 or so per
A
room
tube
for the
per room?
second test.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, per room, because a room may need, depending on the size of it, multiple tubes.
Mm,
So, you
yeah.
can see this property for a couple of $100, the client found out, yes, there's categorically meth, and its combined total was 142 micrograms
Mm,
of meth.
mm-hmm.
You can see from the first detailed, I think we did 25 tubes. That's thousands of dollars
That's a
worth of testing.
lot. That's a lot.
Yeah,
And then and that already is an intersection of the buyer deciding whether to proceed with that next step, because that's a significant investment, right? But very important, because if you look here on this slide, referencing that previous example, 142 is huge. Like, that must be frequent, or, obviously stay there for a while, and, despite her um, being her home, for him to contaminate to that level. There are two kind of key thresholds that are really relevant for you to do further research on as a buyer, as certainly as an investor. Won't go into the history. We've had these huge overreactions to meth back in 2016, when it really started to emerge, and testing emerged as a service, and decontamination, and we almost overreacted without kind of having all the detail. Would that be fair? And then we've kind of got to this place where, if you are a landlord, you want to rent out your house, if there is a test, and there is seen to be higher than a 1.5 microgram reading, you cannot have a tenant occupy that home, which means you get no cash flow, right? So if you are buying to renovate, as in our case, you're better to know, because if you don't, and it's a 142 micrograms, you think you can give it a lick of paint. Well, that meth will very much leach through. There's a risk of it coming back through. And even though you spent thousands of dollars on your renovation, for your property manager to run the meth test pre-tenancy, only to say, well, this is hugely contaminated, you cannot have a tenant, that's the situation you do not want to land yourself in. The other sort of, I guess, incongruency, or the issue that we have, is that insurance regulations are not do not align with the tenancy side of things. So, on one hand, if you let me put this another way, you can have a tenancy once you clean the property to below 1.5. And so there's this void between 1.5 micrograms and 15 micrograms. It's only above 15 micrograms that insurance underwriters tend to have an issue with it. So if you were to not have any baseline meth test, and you have a tenant, and then you do at some stage run the meth test and find that there is meth, maybe it's 13.5 or something sub 15, you think the property's damaged, you can't re-tenant it to a new tenant if they leave, but insurers do not actually consider that property damaged until it's above 15. So there's this weird, like, misalignment between the regulations from those two perspectives, and you can get yourself caught by spending money on a renovation or trying to tenant a property, and find that if you haven't got the baseline test, you can't hold anyone accountable, right? So it's called a baseline in the sense of, before a tenant moves in, you have the meth test, you find it's clear. Basically, it means you assign accountability to that tenant. Obviously there'll be a whole bunch of other processes that your property manager would follow, but as long as you can sort of evidence that at least it was cleaned before a certain person moved in, it gives you that baseline. So there are these, like, quite difficult aspects to navigate. You'll definitely want to take the lead from your property manager as to how and when you should test. Standard practice, I think best practice, but should be standard practice, and I do this with all of my properties, is to run a meth test during due diligence when I purchase. certainly before tenancy and then in between every single turnover. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, and no, just I mean, to understand the two different levels is 1.5 is what there's a methamphetamine standard, NZS 8510, and that references the 1.5. And then it was the government at the time's chief science advisor, Sir Peter Gluckman. He was the
Mm,
one that developed the 15. So both government organisations have slightly different takes on what the level should be. So yeah,
mm,
that's where it's a little bit confusing, but what isn't confusing is the way that it's tested. The methamphetamine, the baseline or the initial test is exactly the same, and you can definitively say whether it's yes or no.
mm.
Is in there, and we're going to talk on it a little bit further, but there's some, if you understand it, there's some opportunity as well with meth testing.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
always something to be scared of if you understand it.
Totally. And that's the thing. If you have the right knowledge and the experience and the right people around you as a strategy in itself, I think you were saying you have investors who lean right into this, right? So where
Yeah,
most will be scared of it and move away, it reduces your competition as a buyer. So if we go back to the Gisborne example, of the 3 units, two of them were found to be positive. So I guess talking between that 1.5 and the 15 micrograms, neither of these units could be tenanted. So interestingly, it was an off-market opportunity. The vendor was very motivated to sell to the point where it was an off-market offering to ourselves. They were very cash strapped. They didn't want to pay a real estate agent fee. And that actually paints part of the picture for why this deal was really difficult to navigate once the meth was found. Somehow it became known to the lender that there was contamination as well. And the lender basically said that this we want to see evidence of decontamination on the back end. So we want to see a clean meth test result on all 3 units before we will unconditionally approve lending for this property. So a few different dynamics based upon the condition of the property. The cash flow I showed you before was also post renovation, so including purchase and renovation for three of the 3 units. There was a significant level of debt for a sort of $772,000 for the purchase and well into the six figures for the renovation. This is a massive amount of debt. So the lender had a pretty heavy opinion about the state of their security that they're taking a mortgage over. So both of these, you could say, unit 1 and 2, not tenantable, but also not damaged in the eyes of the insurer. So when this was found for our clients in due diligence, there was this, basically it became a bit of a legal war between the vendor's lawyer and our purchaser's lawyer as to who should do what. So you might say, let's get a quote for the decontamination, which is the third party process that follows from when the Betta Group team identify where the meth is. And there's a cost to that, which we'll talk about in a second. But basically, if our clients had purchased this property and then wanted to tenant, 2 of the 3 actually are not habitable. So you would not legally be allowed to tenant and then get income from these. So obviously a major issue. Decontamination process, won't talk too much about this. I guess have a little read through. But Matt, you were sort of saying that it has evolved a lot. There are different technologies. You mentioned this fog process, which I wasn't really aware of. Do you want to just give us a quick rundown of that?
yeah, absolutely. There's the meth industry as it's evolved, and the testing and the decontaminations obviously evolved as well. So back in 2016 and those early days of meth testing, you're hearing reports of having to strip the house out, the wallpaper,
Mm,
the wall linings had to come off and things like that. It's not necessarily required. That's changed a lot. In those real extreme examples, sure, that might be the case, but as typical practice, no, it's there's the testing, the decontamination methods have got a lot better as well, a lot less harmful to the property, a lot more cost effective, and one of those decontamination methods is a fogging using a mist to draw the meth out of the walls and
mm,
obviously clean it off following that, and it has proven to be real successful, along with a whole lot of competing products to that around, there's chemicals now that they use to draw the wall, the meth out of the wall. So yeah, it has evolved as well. It's certainly not, there was those horror stories at the start. It's, largely not that
Like
now.
condemn the house kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like massive, yeah. And I guess like live and learn, right? And until you go through this process, I know myself, the first time I bought a property up in Whangarei, I bought these two houses on one title. I almost did this as a matter of process, but didn't seriously consider what the results were, what the results could be, and what it meant. I in fact cancelled a contract as literally a knee-jerk reaction the first time I'd personally bought a property and found that result. I think it was about 40 something from memory, micrograms in one of the houses, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I can't have this. I cancelled the contract, and then it was by talking to your inspector, and they said, look, don't freak out. Like, get the data. There's a process. We can clean the property, get someone to price it up. Everyone does this. They find that they get meth and then they cancel the contract. But you need to actually inquire, understand more, understand that there's actually an opportunity here. After that conversation, I literally jumped onto a new sell and purchase agreement and sent it across and got it back on contract. Thank goodness, because it was like two houses for 415 grand, which is wild thinking about that now. But it was actually the inspector who said, don't do that. Everyone does that before asking the questions. So I would sort of implore, do the research and understand what actions you could take. So, for our clients here, these were the quotes per those two decontaminations, and I guess they didn't go into the tube by tube because of the pricing, but they took the initial composite result and had a clean quote from a third party to decontaminate. What I found interesting is that the levels were so different, but I'm thinking because we didn't have the room by room analyses, the quote is to get the property to below 1.5 micrograms. So even though there was a huge discrepancy in the result for the two units, they had to make sure that they were, I guess, broad brush cleaning the whole place and cover themselves for that, and so the prices across the two actually were very similar. So $14,000 plus the situation where in its own right, you might say this was going to be a good cash flowing property. But the other aspects to that were that the bank already had question about the property, and there was a bit of an issue with the vendor not wanting to spend any money due to their situation. So there was a lot of risk offered into the options for moving forward, which we'll go into in a second. But it's not just the cost of the decontamination itself. There are other costs along with that. So time of the renovation, time lost on the renovation. The clean can take 1 to 2 weeks. And then, of course, if the first clean doesn't get the result, then they need to go back and repeat the clean. So there's risk of damage, increased holding costs as well. And in this case, where it got to was that the sellers, the vendor, the selling lawyer, basically said, and I think they knew this, was that there were too high levels of meth. The vendor had no resource or funds to cover it. They were trying to insist that our purchaser should go unconditional, and then their vendor would decontaminate and provide a certificate at the end, which was a chicken and egg catch-22 for my buyer, who the bank wouldn't give them an unconditional finance offer until the property had been cleaned and a couple of other things. So it just went round and round in circles, and basically the other risk would have been through potentially several cleans, and I've seen this before on properties that with other clients on other deals. We've picked up properties where they have been decontaminated, but the property has actually been damaged through that process, with native timber doors that have been so well cleaned that the fibers of the timber are coming off the door, and we've had to factor that into our renovation spend to replace and paint new doors, and that's fine. We worked ahead with that. In this case with the property, there was specific mention about the nature of the materials on the walls, and the various rooms were super porous, that there was a high risk of damage. And so for our client, the lawyer was saying this is really high, because if you go unconditional, you lose your leverage. They might provide a certificate, but at that point you're already committed. So I guess that's to put that context around. We had a high contamination on 2 of the 3 units, a high cost to decontaminate. Yeah, basically they were put in a position where they were being told they need to go unconditional to get buy-in from the vendor to clean it, but on their hand, they knew that they wouldn't be in a safe place if they did. So look, the options were seek a discount from the vendor and decontaminate, or go unconditional and have the vendor decontaminate, but without any kind of warranty, right? So that risk of the property being damaged was actually going to potentially be a massive cost on top for our client to add to their growing renovation spend. Option 3, walk away. So, oh, hang on. We'll go back here and I will stop sharing screen. I would like to know, what would you do? Would you seek a discount from the vendor and decontaminate, go unconditional and have the vendor decontaminate because they won't discount and they also want warranty, or walk away? Give me 3, 2, end poll. Oh, okay. So 3/4 of you said seek a discount from the vendor and decontaminate. And then the other quarter, basically, you're saying walk away. So that's an interesting one, actually. Seek a discount from the vendor. So in some cases, that can be the case. I think if you can quantify and get a quote to decontaminate and you have those warranties, you know the outcome, you've had a lot of conversations around what the potential risks could be to the property, certainly that would be an option. But given the situation with the vendor actually saying that they would only clean upon the client going unconditional, it removed a lot of control from our purchaser. So they actually decided to walk away, which was a real shame because of the potential outcome that could have come from that property, but the risks were too high. They didn't even have lending, and they also had no warranties from the vendor with that decontam. Is there anything you'd want to add to sort of talking about the myth before we move into build?
Yeah, there's certainly like there's a lot like myth is it if you understand it, you can really work with the the methamphetamine as well though, right? So like it's definitely we are seeing like damage to the property as well in certain examples. As I said, the technology is getting better, which really helps. But certain certain properties do decontaminate better than others, and so if you
Mm,
can understand that and work with and better groups, more than happy to our inspectors are more than happy to work with and help you guys and give you guys advice. There is some opportunity there as well.
mm,
In this instance here, highly porous materials, you can sort of see it was likely going to cause damage, probably the best option to walk away. But certainly on other properties, there is some really big opportunity. And I mentioned to you, we actually have investors that specifically target these meth homes to do, to really, get high yields out of them because they get them at that cheaper rate, right?
yes.
So and then they understand how to decontaminate from there. So,
Mm,
and there's little pointers too, like they get their contracts, which you guys are really good at. You get your contracts, your decontamination costs. It's a set figure, a set price to get them down to under that 1.5. So you're not having to repeat on the testing. You're not having to pay extra if they take longer to decontaminate and stuff like that.
yeah.
So there are some real like tips and tricks if you can understand it and really educate yourself. There's some good opportunity in there, but
Yeah.
also understanding that there's the downside to it as well if you get it wrong. And in those the Lockwood homes, those sort of properties are really difficult to decontaminate. So you've
Oh,
you've got
wow.
to understand
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, like no two properties are the same, right? And just like understanding the
Yeah.
variables and like what contributes to that. That's very interesting. Your inspectors must get called up by by investors looking for those opportunities.
They got a passion for it, right? They love helping. So it's like for us, it's our business, it's our life. So we sort of deal with it all the time. And they do find it hard too
Mhm.
because you get the tears as well. You get the vendors of the property call in as well,
Yes.
asking, what do I do? I had no idea they might have brought a property without a meth test, held it
Yeah.
for,
Hmm.
even at the moment, there's a lot of distressed sellers out there. Vendors of properties, and some of them have unfortunately got meth in it that they've found when purchasers have gone in and
Wow.
done different things. So you've got those stories as well, and
Yes.
the insurance company doesn't see as as favourable to them if they haven't had that test done. So there's a lot of stories in this meth space, but a lot of opportunity too if you understand it.
Totally. And actually, on that, so what our clients actually did, they had no buyer's remorse from that situation because, like you say, all of that knowledge, all of that experience, and the expertise and the contacts they had, within a month, they've just gone unconditional now on a deal that is by far superior to that last one. So, absolutely no love lost there. Excuse me. In fact, this one ticked a lot more boxes and they felt empowered and educated in how to deal with when this property was on due diligence for them again. Got the Betta inspect reports and found there was meth here as well. So we weren't expecting it, but in this case, they came armed and they had the previous experience and the loss of that at that time to then say, well, actually, we're looking at a duplex that was meth contaminated, almost a similar sort of level. And they were able to quantify it, get the local, in a different city, this is in Palmerston North, they were able to quantify a guaranteed result to get it to a tenantable state. But in this case, in terms of the intended scope, they cash flow hacked this property going from two bedrooms to 2 threes. And in fact, the return is about the same as the previous, but for about a third less debt capacity compared to that. So they have lending left in the bank to go into a second project after this, and they've actually added significant value, well, they will add significant value and cash flow to this because they actually are turning these from two bedrooms into 2 threes. So what they felt they lost initially at the time on the first project absolutely gave them that knowledge and that artillery to kind of go in and get an amazing result. So I think it's a really good example of what you were just saying. Now, we're going to go into building report. Now, this has a lot more variables. We're not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the build report itself, but from as an investor looking to buy and to renovate, this is a Christchurch example where our client James had already, similar to the first, had qualified that this project was going to tick all the boxes in terms of add bedroom, not 1 bedroom, but 2, very large 2-bedroom house in a location where a 3-bedroom property is normally over $500,000 in its same sort of state. So he felt he was onto a real winner with this. The plan was to add 2 bedrooms, and in fact, we actually needed to do that. The rental market's a little soft around the country, as you well may know, and so this was really a very calculable project. By adding 2 bedrooms, this was going to be a positive cash flow property. Now, we had an intended scope, our power teams had been there, and now came the build report. This was an auction sale, so our client had to be completely unconditional and ready. So in this case, meth check, building check, and asbestos check. And initially we didn't run the asbestos, but there were a few hints, and through the inspector that went for the build check, you might notice if you've been through this before, the ceilings have this interesting texture, and that can often be one of these sort of hints with that popcorn type ceiling, as it's so called in the industry. Hadn't really thought about that because it's not that common. We could see there was a huge amount of value to be added to this. It was set to be a really great project. And the initial scope was to add 2 internal bedrooms and really boost that cash flow. So in terms of our strategy, this ticked all the boxes. It looked really, really strong. It's kind of a unicorn in the sense that they were looking to add 2 bedrooms. We're usually looking for the 1, but there was a really great way we could have laid out a 4th. So the intended scope was going to be around $50,000. And really this example is more about how they sought the information through the build report, and the information that came from that changed the dynamic of the result. So for our clients, they're looking to achieve an 8% gross return. That's assuming full debt for purchase price and renovation. And they were well over that based upon the indicative price they were looking to pay at auction, and with a total spend on the scope of around about $50,000, including adding those 2 rooms. Just before I kind of go into what we found in this case, Matt, do you have any stories or examples of why a buyer should care about a building report?
Yeah, look, there's so many examples I could talk about here, but one of the ones that just popped up recently, actually, which I had to have a bit of a chuckle at, was an inspector went into a property again, a really nice property. It was in a lower quality housing sort of area in this particular suburb, but a really nice family home. And the inspector went in there, was inspecting it. Those vendors were moving on to their second or third home, and he went under the subfloor and noticed that all the copper piping had been, all the waste piping had been cut off at floor level. Someone had gone in, presumably when these people were at work or away, and stole all the copper piping, the waste piping,
Mm.
and so
Oh,
everything was dumping onto the ground. Unbeknown to those owners of this property. So the shower, everything they'd stolen it. So that was a classic example where, I thought it was, a reasonable one to share here because it's something that was just so unexpected.
yes.
And these are the things that the inspectors are seeing all the time,
Mhm.
when they're seeing that. I mean, there's 100 examples like that, but that was one that was quite a chuckle just recently, actually, that
Yeah, I
happened.
mean, the lunchroom stories you must have at the office must be just out the gate. These like like you say, you would never anticipate this kind of scenario, and it's awful, right? And that's the thing. The buyer would have gone, well, you can use that report and the outcomes from that report to find what works for them, right? So, um, poor inspector going under there.
Yeah,
Um,
it wasn't
yeah,
good. Like they were smart. The people that stole were smart though. They left the water piping so that the water hadn't turned off. So there was no way of knowing it. And we don't know when this happened. This might have been like 3 or 6 months earlier that
yeah.
this, that they'd stolen that. So there was no
Wow.
trace. It was something that no one was expecting. But obviously as the purchaser, they were really grateful
Mm.
that we could pick that up. And in this instance, we believe the vendors got it repaired and the deal carried on. There was no additional cost to the purchaser, so
Yeah.
probably a good result ended up. But
Yes.
yeah, something that
You
was picked up in that due diligence phase with the building report.
Exactly right, because if the purchaser had not run that report, they would have gone ahead, purchased the property, and then been up for that cost, and yet the offer would have
Yeah.
already been reflective of a normal operable house without that cost. So that's a massive cost saving,
Yeah,
right?
because
So,
the building report's there to protect you, right? It's not necessarily there to stop the sale or tip the deal over, right? We're there to give you all the information possible, and in this instance, there was a few $1,000s worth of repairs that were done,
mm,
paid for the cost of the building report that was done by the purchaser. It covered it by a long way. So
mm,
we're really looking to aid and support and help you all with as much information as we can to make those informed decisions and help through and negotiate if there is an issue that comes up.
yeah, absolutely, and it's for the best interests of the purchaser, right? So you get the information, good, bad, or otherwise, and at least you can use it as a tool, right, to make
Of
sure
course,
you're in control.
we're
Yeah.
working 100% for the purchaser. They're our client. We're there. We don't have a personal opinion on whether it's a good property and to buy in regards to its location or how it looks or where the kitchen or the shed's located. We're there solely to look for significant defects and major maintenance issues to protect you
Mm.
as the purchaser.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say, like on this example here, on the left is a snapshot of a Betta Inspect report, which is why I love it, right? You have 10 categories, it's really straightforward, traffic light system. Like, honestly, it couldn't be more simple. And from my point of view, when I'm coaching my clients, there are a couple of key categories that we are looking for. It's the weather tightness. So you've got cladding, exterior, anything that's kind of is on that exterior protecting the build itself is the first thing that we're looking for. And then secondly to that, what is the interior like? We have a planned scope of works. We know we're spending money planning to add value and renovate and add rooms. But is there anything else that we need to find through this process that's going to massively change the numbers, like change the renovation scope, the pricing? Um, and thirdly, are the technologies, are the materials still relevant or current to what you'd expect? So basically, the traffic light system here is really great because you break it down much further in the report. It's incredibly detailed, but you summarize it in a way where we can get the snapshot. Anything with a red or with the R signifies like you really need to draw attention to this, right? So it shoots straight to where you need to investigate further. There's likely some additional cost, which is great. it's really important to point out on an existing property that you would expect to see a range of color. Unlike a new build, you would expect everything to be green, right? It's a completely new, you have warranties, it's newly finished. I often have clients who have come from like that new build investing world, and then they see the first existing build report, they kind of freak out and go, oh my goodness, there's so many things wrong with it. It's all about the context of where these results sit, and also within respect of the plans. We'll talk about moisture in a second. I would be shocked if I ever had a report that came through on an existing build where there wasn't a high moisture reading around the shower over bath. So in terms of context, don't freak out about that. If you're looking to refresh and replace and upgrade the bathroom, who cares? You know, to some extent, most of the time we can deal with that because we're already planning, we've already included in our costings to completely deal with that. That doesn't scare us, that's part of the context. However, things like piles, roof integrity, external cladding, if there's any risk of weather getting in, not only can that shift the outcome of the this as an asset or an investment asset for you, it also could create questions for your bank or your insurance provider. So understanding when to react and how to react is all part of getting the detail and using it correctly. What came through in this Christchurch property is that, you know, sometimes we find previous owners have upgraded plumbing and electrical to various extents. In this case, a lot of the materials were kind of redundant or past their good life. And so both electrical and plumbing had significant needs. And again, outside of that shower over bath high moisture reading, there were some serious moisture readings around the build, and that would have been reflective of the other aspect of the Betta report that indicated there were some cladding issues. So also needing to add on to that some likelihood of an exterior repaint. A lot of moisture ingress was popping up in different rooms, so that is not something you ever want to see unless there's a really like acute reason that you know you can deal with, solve, and remedy. So mold was visible on some of the walls. The thing that we actually didn't expect at all, but you know, upon reflection, you look at the ceiling, you see this kind of hint of this popcorn type ceiling, is the asbestos. So, Matt, do you want to just quickly talk about kind of, there are a couple of different types of asbestos. Should we care? When should we care? Is it expensive?
Yeah, nice. Look, asbestos is something that is actually a very good product. Look, it's something that you need to educate yourself and be aware of, but it's certainly not something that you don't need to be scared of. You know, like a lot of properties, asbestos was a widely used product in New Zealand and, you know, used in thousands of homes across the country. So it's not something that's really uncommon, particularly in those older properties. So
Mm,
first of all, if you do come across a property with asbestos, the first thing is not to panic. The second thing is to understand that asbestos and the type of product that it is, right? If you're, you know, a product in its asbestos in its stable state, as in it's in a good condition and isn't likely to be touched, is likely to pose very little risk to you.
mm,
So it you know, it's the fibers and the when it becomes friable or airborne, that's when it becomes a problem. So which is why if you're renovating and things like that, if you're aware
mm.
of it, there could be some cost implications. But
Yes.
largely, the asbestos, as long as it's in good condition, is something that's in thousands of homes right now across the country that isn't, you know, isn't causing a huge amount of concern. The key is that you know that it's there and that you understand it and manage that asbestos that you've
Mm,
got there. But certainly not something that, you know, you might want to fly off, you know, the handle at.
yeah.
If you're doing extensive renovations, obviously then it becomes a little bit more expensive and to deal with. But you know, it's about understanding it is how to deal with the asbestos.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing, like there are very much building code and specific processes to follow when found. So understanding the context again, it's all context driven, how you deal with it. And it also comes down from my point of view with my clients is what's their intention. Unless they're looking to knock over that property, if there's a substantial area of it, it may not be an issue if you can conceal it, it's not disturbed, like you say, and it has that integrity and it's totally fine. In this case, to add those 2 bedrooms, we needed to disrupt a lot of that ceiling panel. It did need to be addressed. And so what we found, because of the building report, as you can see to the right hand side, is what was added in from that. So due to the type of asbestos it is, there are a couple of different types. Through testing, we found that it was of it's basically looking at the cost to remove. The site has to be contained. You need a third party expert to bring it in at that level. This was through the lounge, the living, the kitchen, the hallway, and then to dispose of is actually more the significant cost. So $25,000 to remove. So if you think it's better to just not know, well, at the point where you're forced to know and you're forced to take action, this is the kind of cost you can be up for. So it's just not worth not knowing. The electrical and plumbing upgrades were significant. Also, we were looking to move some of it, so there was additional labor and costs included in that, which is why it's so high. And then with the moisture issues, there's a combination of some exterior fixes, as well as the need to actually completely overhaul certain areas, re-jib, reline, and completely change. So I guess if you think about that original scope, thinking about how the power of that information from the build report more than 2.5x'd our intended renovation scope. This put a lot more pressure on our client, who thought they had a pretty prescribed plan and thought they had a value that they would go into auction as their ideal price. If you think about what happened before the building report, they were set to achieve close to an 8% return. It's in a great central suburb within Christchurch, would have been potentially a really great long-term asset for them for cash flow. It was going to cash flow from year one, like immediately. However, with what was found from the report and all the additional costs that came with that to add to their renovation and therefore their total debt, the gross yield dropped. I would still say, that's one aspect to think about. 6.6 is probably still better than on the market. This client had a minimum yield that they wanted to achieve, and this certainly breached that. But also the property would have then become a negatively geared property where they would have had to top up a few dollars per week. Not significant, but it did break their buy box or their criteria. So if you think about planning for a 50K renovation, that jumping to $130,000, that is a significant change. And also, like, the renovation as a proportion of the property starts to put questions, raise questions as well. Like, is it viable? Is this the best use of my cash? In the auction room itself, what we did with that information, knowing that, if they moved ahead, there was so much more they needed to spend and do, we came up with a plan A and a plan B. So given that it was auction, you have no idea what the competition is going to be like until you're in that room. You don't have control, unlike when you have more price by negotiation and deadline offer, different strategies that help you retain control. Basically, he could have walked away, but after all of that investment and still knowing there could be an opportunity, maybe no one else would turn up to auction, that was one option. Number two was to have a maximum, like an ideal price, and with taking into account all of the spend that needed to occur. We then had a plan B, which was not our ideal price, but a stretch price. So if he had been forced to push above his ideal price, we had already then scoped some areas of the renovation scope that they could have simplified or streamlined or made a little bit more light touch, in order to be able to still have a good shot at bidding, but we also knew what they would compromise on to make it work. So what I'm going to, hang on, sorry, I've just lost my share screen. In the end, so he went to auction, and then, hang on, can you see my screen, Matt?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Went to auction, and the result was, let me just present, sorry. Oh, hang on, I've just lost my setting. Is that fine?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So basically went in with those two different approaches, and did not purchase the property. The bidding went like went on fire, and it kept going and going and going. What was really good though is that for James, he knew, based upon his calculators and the due diligence and being informed, he knew his absolute maximum price. So someone else purchased that property, and if we think about who that person might be, there are two potential outcomes of whoever bought the property. So either it was a homeowner who purchased it to renovate to their liking, so they weren't restricted necessarily as much as an investor who was trying to get some kind of financial benefit or outcome. Outcome two might have been that it was otherwise a different investor who bought it. However, what they would have then had was a negatively geared property, so they would be topping it up to pay the bank and with a lower return. So having really clear criteria, as our client James did, meant that he could be informed and basically decide his maximum price. So therefore, he'd had no buyer's remorse. In terms of buyer's remorse, if that were the case, you think about it from these two perspectives of these two examples. With meth, if you don't understand the information, if you don't understand the process or what to do with that information, it's quite likely someone can move ahead thinking that it's okay, they don't know. But once you get that new baseline test, it could be your property manager or for some trigger, or if regulations change and you need to test, you could be massively exposed to some huge costs and risk that you would not have planned for. Also, possibly miss the opportunity. If you are a seasoned investor, you might be looking for these examples, like Matt said. With the build reports, there are so many different things that you need to know, whether it be, Matt, as you sort of categorize it, it's like about product integrity, are the chattels working, are there any particular materials, right, that actually have been recalled because they're not holding up to our conditions. And then there's that whole human aspect. So with that copper piping example, who would have thought that a build report could actually show that and highlight that, but it does. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like there's just another example is we went to a property and this was a newer property, and the weatherboards on a property come pre-painted, pre-primed, and we went to that property and they'd put one layer of paint over that newer property, and so that paint had already started blistering and bubbling. And these are sort of things, that's a big problem and a huge cost to repaint that property. So that's like another example where it's not necessarily been a physical thing like someone's stolen something. That's something where a product may have, been installed or, incorrectly, or, the workmanship wasn't up to a tradesman-like manner. So, but there's a whole lot of other things as well, like products. We've had a lot. We all know that the Ducks Quest plumbing, what happened there, but there's been a whole lot. There's Onduline roofing. There's Shitterclad's had some problems. There's the scope heaters. There's a lot of different products out there as well that have failed and are continually being brought to the market that aren't necessarily performing as intended as well. So it's it is quite a broad scope, and what the building inspection does cover. Obviously, there's 10 sections there. And each of those, there's elements within each of those that really could be a risk factor to a purchaser. And it's really about having that information and then understanding that and working forward with that
Yes,
information.
yeah, exactly. And like you just don't know what you don't know, right? So there's so many things you can catch, particularly with the build report. So you just never know what you might find. There's always, I'm sure
Yeah,
you have something new all the time.
yeah. Look, it's constant. It's but the good thing is our we've got a big inspector network. As I said, we do one every 10 house sales in New Zealand. So the inspectors are talking between themselves as well, and so we're seeing different products and the different areas of products perform differently as well. So
Mm,
property is sort of like a living thing, right? It's deteriorating and needing to be maintained. It's not something that you buy once and then you don't have to do
yeah.
anything with. So even regionalised, there's different things that happen to a property that don't happen in other areas. Whether it
Mm,
be a high snowfall area or something where with high sunshine hours, or there's a range of different factors. So the team's
mm,
always communicating on this, and our sole focus is to make sure that you're well informed at that purchase stage, so that your investments are you're not getting any surprises, particularly when you're working on yields and returns based on numbers. You don't want those
yeah,
surprises. So
yeah.
yeah, look, a lot of examples. I could talk probably all night on examples.
Yeah, for sure. But and that's the thing, like to have the information, right? Hey guys, we'll do a final poll. We've been through a couple of very different examples, one about the build report, the importance of a building report, and also about math. So I'm going to put one more poll up. Do you feel clearer about the power of due diligence? You can clearly see from these two examples, um, how they can a prospective deal you're looking at can massively change. So you might have a plan in both of these cases from a method point of view, what my clients were looking to achieve. Both of those properties ticked all the boxes for what they wanted. The cash flow was initially great, same for the yields, same for the value add, and even from our power teams going to site on the build costings, everything was completely aligned until in each of these examples, we had that intel from the Betta group, and you can see that massively the outcomes changed. And also on the build aspect, Matt, there's the initial issues to deal with or add into the scope, but it also gives you almost like a roadmap, right? So if you've got some orange lights, it's kind of telling you what maintenance and what you might want to be prepared for in the coming years. They may not be significant issues, but at least you can use that document to give yourself a bit of a forecast of what else might be the next thing to pop up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% what the report should be used for. Obviously, it's got massive benefit for you to understand the property at the purchase stage, but also for the ongoing maintenance of the property. It will say, it might be a roof, for example, might be an orange, and it might be that there's some light corrosion on the roof, or that it's there's some flashings that might not be done correctly, right? Those are things that might be siliconed, that need
Yeah.
work, will need work in the future. But as long as you're aware of them, they don't need actioning right now, or they're not going to cost significant amounts of money right now. But they're something that may need actioning in the future. For example, if you're
Mm,
aware that the roof's starting to corrode, you might budget to replace that, in that 5 to 10 year mark, or you might choose to rust treat it early on and try and prolong its lifespan.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
working with that building report and understanding it, to get as much from it as possible for now when you're buying, and also ongoing.
Mm.
I think we might be a bit biased, but should be hugely beneficial to you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And also with all that cash flow from the deal that goes ahead that is great,
Yeah.
then you can provision for those sorts of things, right? So at least you've got the information. So now I will just move us along. So not
What are,
surprisingly, but
what are
and
we
it was
going
a
to
great,
do what are we going to do if they say no to this poll and they don't
yeah.
come with the diligence? I hope
Thankfully,
we have done. There's a few yeses in there.
that's the thing. We can't cover all bases, but at least 99% of you did say yes, you feel more
Hey.
comfortable. Yeah. And at least like you can feel hopefully empowered and that you can also replay this. We'll upload it to the YouTube if you ever feel like you're in a circumstance where you can reflect or mirror or work from the information here. Now you know, right? So you know two scenarios that you didn't know before, and that is massively, hopefully helpful, so that you can fine tune, use the data from the reports, renegotiate, get the property and the deal to work for you. So that's what we want. Hey, look, I'm just going to give us a little bit of a summary of our what. Oh, hang on, let me
Yeah,
just.
your screens.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
not. Oh, what's happened there? Not showing. 1 second. Hopefully that will work better. Is that showing?
Yep.
Yep, nice, cool. So I'll just do a brief kind of update of how, as Wolf Property, we help our clients in terms of project objectives and
Or
what.
you might want to go full screen on that one.
Oh, has that not gone? Oh, what's happened here? Hang on, sorry guys. I am just going to jump to my Prezzo and make sure that is working correctly. And full screen mode. 1 second here. How's that looking?
Perfect.
Good, cool, awesome. So what we are here for is, as you would have seen the tone through my commentary with respect to what is found in due diligence, we want to calculate our outcome. So yes, property investing can be risky in terms of how you want to invest. If you are looking to buy to add value and boost equity and cash flow, that's definitely what we are focused on. We want to have knowledge, is working with Betta Group to help us translate that data into outcomes in terms of gross return, rents, the value of the property. And we target 8% gross returns on a standalone property and upwards from there based upon how many dwellings we have. Not quite as extensive as the Betta Group network, but definitely close to. These are the key areas where we have full power teams to help you execute. When I talk about power teams, it's everyone on ground where the property is so that you can be anywhere else around the world, literally. So commonly for myself, my husband, especially for him, he has no idea what we buy. He's never seen it. He knows that we follow a process that qualifies that the deal is good enough for what our criteria are. And if we come across an opportunity in places other than these, we certainly have the networks to complete the renovation as well. This is a snapshot from our website. I won't go into this in too much detail. The examples we mentioned today are from the Accelerate program, where we're looking to achieve that 8% gross return, assuming it's all debt, so purchase and renovation debt, you're using lending. And at this point with, in terms of interest rates, our clients are looking at neutral to positively geared, so they're making cash flow straight out the gate post renovation, which is why we love this strategy. We also have our boardroom service, which is double-digit returns based on more complex projects, which we didn't cover off today. However, we work on a per project basis so that you can focus on your next goal. We work with you and your broker to meet your goals. And we're very, very passionate about doing whatever it takes to make sure our clients get the deals. Your success is our success. And in fact, what is a funny sort of, I guess, background story to hear and how Matt and I are both here, I'd never reached out to Betta Group, but I've always worked with their teams. Call the 0800 number, email the team. All of the reports for all of my personal properties have been through Betta Group. Again, I love the consistency and the accessibility and the speed to site. So that was just something that became part and parcel of what I did. And it was actually through needing to jump on a plane to Hawke's Bay a couple of months ago to help out a few clients who weren't quite finding what they needed. I honed in on a couple of mega investors who were divesting, and I caught wind of that through our builder, who is a builder for this mega investor. And I said, hey, look, show me your portfolio. I'm jumping on a plane. Let's walk through a bunch of properties. And it was by realizing that Matt and the team were based there, I thought, how have I never met the team? So walked into the office, took the morning tea and just said, I know Olivia, I know all the team, I know all the names, and actually got to meet them. So that's actually how we got to today. But very hands-on. We will do absolutely everything we need to make sure our clients succeed with our strategies. Matt, do you want to give us a little summary of how everyone here in need of your due diligence, how they get in touch and what you offer?
Yeah, awesome, and we appreciated the morning tea. It was so good to have you in here, and morning tea was great, guys, as well. So, and look at Betta Inspected, you can see that's our brand that does the building inspections and the meth testing, and yeah, we're nationwide. We service 100% of New Zealand. We have an amazing customer service team here. We've got 10 customer service centre representatives, and there's 20 of us here at head office. Amazing team supporting all of our inspector network nationwide, and working on those property transactions to make them as smooth as possible for you guys. So yeah, we inspect 1 every 10 house sales. We've done 150,000 reports. We do turn our reports around in 24 hours. The cool thing is with you guys, with Wolf, Wolf's a partner client of ours, so you guys get priority treatment. So if you do have any deals that come through, make sure you mention Wolf, and we'll get our inspector in there ASAP to get that report turned around for you. So we also have things like Afterpay, credit card, everything to help investors ease their cash flow through that due diligence phase as well. And our inspectors follow up with a phone call, or you're more than welcome to give them a call and ask any questions. They have got a huge amount of knowledge, and are here to support every one of our clients, and particularly you guys to get what you need and get supported through that due diligence period.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So definitely give them a shout when you need this kind of information. So for tomorrow, you'll receive an email from us welcoming you to catch up with myself for a discovery call. If you feel as though we can help you and you're interested in existing builds to renovate and boost your servicing, boost your equity to accelerate your property portfolio journey, keep an eye out for that and be sure to click to meet with us there. Now, let's just see in the Q&A. if we have a short few minutes to see any questions that have popped up. So, Matt, have you got a couple of minutes and we'll just see what is in here? Okay, a couple questions here. Actually, two questions, cool. Let's see. Is a spot test adequate for meth testing? Hang on, a spot test adequate for meth testing with results on spot? Do you need to do testing within a lab? I guess it depends on what your intended use is for this. So I think what they're alluding to here is you can buy a test kit, right? Maybe at a
Yeah.
retailer. Are
Yep.
they the same test as your composite, your initial test?
Well, they are obviously identifying meth. That's the intent of them. However, the only accurate way to test for methamphetamine is by getting a lab to test it. So there is quite a process at that laboratory. So also the way you sample as well. Like there's a certain way that and method and area that you test. You might have seen images of little squares that go on the wall. So there's certain pattern that the inspectors will use to get accurate results.
Hmm.
Also around understanding where to test as well. So
Yes.
those sections that are more absorbent than others and more susceptible to meth, will get a more accurate result because you're only for the term that was used like spot testing, even with an initial test or an initial composite test, they're the same. Initial composite test is your spot checking, but you're doing everything you can to, using the inspector's skills, knowledge, and expertise to make sure that we're getting an accurate result for you. So even looking at
Hmm.
things like airflow, guys, like that really affects it. People that smoke meth in a property with an HRV system or something, that can cause the meth to spread throughout the property, right? So
Yes. Yes.
understanding that, and that's where yes, you can use those. You can use a spot check. The accuracy of them. It isn't defined. They don't meet the standard. So
Okay.
there's questions
Mm,
around that. But
okay.
largely they will get meth. But I think where the real benefit is the accuracy of the lab, and then obviously this inspector's skills, knowledge, and expertise to make sure that they're accurately
Yeah.
finding that meth in that property.
Yeah, you're so right, right? Like location, like knowing those high risk areas, right? And based upon if someone is using as opposed to manufacturing, the locations could be different, right? I
Yeah.
recall on the example of my own, I mentioned, I was always sort of surprised by why they would test above the ranch slider door frame because someone might hang out there and do whatever
Yep.
they do. I
Yeah.
never would have thought that. But
Yeah.
to understand the insight of why, like that's the thing, right? You're testing where you are because
Yeah.
you know it gets the result. So yeah, I guess
Correct.
sort of proceed with caution and understand like what you might do with that result. If it's just to know, then like you know,
Yeah. And the sensitivity, right, guys? Like the lab's getting down to like 0.02 of a microgram. So very, very sensitive. So the
mm,
likelihood of that yes, no being really accurate, like, is really, really high.
hmm,
Okay. So the margin for error with a lab test
yeah.
is real minor. Like, you kind of got to be doing it real wrong to
Yeah.
miss it.
Yeah, totally. Exactly right. Because it's a 10 by 10 square centimeter swatch, basically, right? The initial test. So, the
Yeah.
results can be massively different in one room versus knowing where they might be versus a corner of a wall, which has very little relevance, or, as
Yeah.
an example.
The material, right? Like a varnished door compared to a jib wall, or somewhere that might be above or below a heat pump, or like you said, a
Yeah.
ranch cider. So there's
Mhm.
very, 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 it is very sensitive. It's because it's so accurate. It's very
Yes.
sensitive as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, making sure that, and that's what we sort of talked about. It's about not freaking out initially, because there is a lot to meth testing.
Mm,
So it's understanding that and having the inspector that can talk through with you and
yeah.
understand it.
It's a huge value
It's,
add to have a
yeah,
human in a conversation. Okay.
100%. And some of them you will pull out of, and some of them you won't. It's about
Yeah.
understanding it all
And
is the
what
key.
to do.
Power is knowledge, right? Yeah, knowledge
Yeah.
is power. So
For sure, for sure. Question, is there a general level of meth where non-commercial cleaning is sufficient? So I guess the question is, and this wouldn't be better inspect, there would be a third party who runs the decontamination quote and scope. Um, Yeah, is there sort of are you aware, as a general sense of what that threshold might be? I know that if it, in certain circumstances, a decontaminator might say to my client, this is, yes, it's over the 1.5, but it is so minor that you can sugar soap, as an example. So how do you know when you cross that bridge from sugar soap to needing commercial? Can you add
Yeah,
anything to
yeah.
that, or is that a little,
No, no, great.
yeah,
Both
yeah?
great, both very good questions, and very clever questions. The myth with the decontamination. First of all, we're not decontaminators. We have to be independent of the
Yes.
decontaminators and very much at arm's length because
Yes.
obviously we're working independent of them, but we obviously do. There's a lot. They talk to us a lot because they're working with our reports, right? So we
Mm,
do get a reasonable understanding. So the myth is in like there's a lot of variability there. The short answer is there's not a yes no like oh yeah is it 30 don't if it's 30 you can sugar soap if it's above no there's because it is very variable on the type of product right the type of
mm,
like the wall linings for
yeah.
example they're very different like if they're plywood opposed to a jib board or particle board or and even the ceiling tile right softwood tiles are very different to a plasterboard
Yes.
ceiling so there's a lot of variability in regards to what how that's been absorbed. The
Mm,
methamphetamine, which is the grey bit of it, or the harder bit to
yes.
it's not necessarily black and white with a figure. What I would say is that absolutely there is a level of cleaning that you can do yourself. Like just like anything, it is a something that you could clean off yourself the hardest bit, and even in that example I gave of the elderly lady's property, our
Mm,
second test we did, which was post decontamination, there was still a couple of rooms that had meth in it, and I sort of, if we had time, I was going to talk on that and say, look, what can happen, and this can very much happen if you're decontaminating yourself, is that the actual second test or the detailed test after we've after you've done the decontamination can often be higher, right? Because you've got to remember by cleaning, you're drawing the meth out of the
right.
wall.
Yes.
So you've got to be careful, right? That there has been a number of examples where individuals have tried to save money by doing it themselves, and it's actually sort of turned on them, and the results have actually been higher. They've done a great job. They've pulled the meth out, but they haven't been able to get to the last stage, which is to be able to get rid of it off the wall. So
Mm,
there's a bit to that. So certainly at the lower levels, I would say there's an opportunity there. But yeah, you just got to be aware of some of those little things that could potentially trip you up if you did try and do it yourself.
yeah. No, that's very, very insightful. Yeah. A question around how long meth stays in the building. Is it, unless it's cleaned, does it sit?
Yeah, like it's that's it. Like reasonably new, right? So what are we, 2025? It sort of kicked off around, say, 2015, maybe a bit before that, but, largely that. So we're still learning around the length of time that it's staying in the building as well. But
Mm.
certainly we're not seeing, we have done some testing like a couple of years later, and,
Oh,
particularly
yeah.
testing in between tenancies, so we are testing a property regularly
Mm.
and where properties have had meth that we've initially tested, that's not moving much at all. Like it is decreasing, but marginal.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're still working with the length of time. Like I'd love to be able to see and say, hey, don't worry, in 10 years' time, it's going to be all gone. No, no matter the level,
Yeah.
but. We're not. We're certainly not seeing that. We are seeing that it does decrease in time,
It's,
but
yeah. And it
largely
sits
it's a bit
around.
like nicotine smoke on a ceiling, right? It doesn't, might evaporate over time, but
Yeah.
very slowly. So
Okay.
similar to that, I guess,
Yeah.
if we were to relate it in those
Yeah.
sort of terms.
You certainly wouldn't wait a number of years to hope it goes away so you can get a second tin because it'll cost you more. Yeah, really
No,
interesting one. I didn't know that. And then one, okay, so how many properties that go through due diligence would your client say no to? Oh, so that'll be for me. So in fact, we normally really strongly pre-qualify when we do going through our gated process. So we lead with the figures and the strategy, all of the value add and the what we want to achieve with the property physically, financially, to pre-qualify it before we even get our power teams to site, let alone spend money on these reports. So this is kind of like the last gate or qualifier to make sure that the facts of the property from various experts' perspective supports our intended plan. So very, very rarely would we get to this point for the property not to work. It's only in these extreme circumstances with, for example, these two examples where something fresh came in from due diligence that completely threw the deal. So, and that is always my intention, is to get my clients is through as much of that free due diligence and lead with the outcomes that you have. And then basically this is making sure everything works and you get the information that kind of protects yourself. You know that the asset is what you think it will be, especially because you're remote most of the time. But keep an eye out for that email. Hey, Matt, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone here has learned a lot. If you want to reach out to Betta Group, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, give us a call on our 0800 number, 0800 422 388, or you can flick us an email at info@bettagroup.co.nz. That's BETTA group.co.nz. Yeah, we love everyone at Wolf, and more than happy to help out in any way we can to support you guys on your property buying and investing journey. It's do some awesome stuff, you guys. So it's
Awesome.
really cool to be able to present here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for how much you help us tonight and my clients, and we will catch you at the Reno Roadie in a month or so.
Really looking forward to it. It's gonna be good. It's gonna
Awesome.
be good.
Yeah, have a great night. Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone tonight for your valuable time. Have a great night.
Thanks. See ya.